Media that we use, our phones, social media, it's just a potpourri pie of various different mediums that we are using, we are interacting with, right? So and that the size of that data is humongous, right? It's altogether, when you put everything together, it's a lot of data, right? And then, I mean, obviously hidden, read between the lines, it's also talking about the format of the data, right? So it also says that all this data is substantially on the cloud, most of it because we are interacting with web-based platforms which we are hooked to, and it has got everything, but how do you figure it out, right? So can we just be ready for it, right? And it can also work with various different formats, which is the last part right here, where it says it hears you, which means you can use the big data processing platforms or softwares to process audio, video, text, images. There's one more. Now this is also a reality. A lot of firms in the US over the last year or so, 2013, I have heard quite a few firms moving their data centers, right? And the idea is that each and every company in the United States has big data implementation, some form of big data implementation, specifically moving their entire infrastructure to some Hadoop distribution in the next 5-year plan. And this was a factoid of 2012 end or 13, if I remember correctly, which means we are already in the first couple of years. In the next 3 years, each and every company is going to have some implementation or the other, right? Now, what does it require to store and process big data, right? It requires massive data centers, which would in turn require a lot of power. You have all seen the video on tour of Facebook data centers and so on. If you haven't, you can check it out on YouTube. And this is just a dry pun on everyone moving their data centers, right? So that's that. Now, and just touching up on this point, right? How did it become so big? Because everyone is saying these factoids, like half of or 80% of all the data that we have today has been generated in the last 3 to 5 years. So what did we do wrong in the last 15 years? I mean, in the 15 years before that, why were we not generating so much data? Obviously, because our devices were different. Okay, and by the way, at this point of time, IoT has crossed Internet of Things, Internet of Everything, as Cisco calls it, has crossed big data in the S-curve, which is published by I think McKinsey or Gartner or something. You can take a look at it on Google again. So 25 years back, for anyone who has that much experience, I mean, obviously I have 9 years experience, but I've only heard the major amount of data that was generated was a lot under the control of human beings, right? So there were CRM softwares, or you would have DTP softwares and base level softwares which are very schema bound. It was all defined, and all the data that were being entered by humans, right? And that obviously maintained the structure and integrity of the data. The pain point at that point of time, or the pain point with that form of a processing, is that you cannot leverage that information to read someone's mind, okay? And that's pun intended. I mean, right now, if you have read what is happening with Facebook, or what has happened, that entire thing about privacy and what they were doing, their experiments and so on, it's just an implementation. And now that does not mean that it's the end of the world and that is the only way we are all doomed with big data. That is not it. There are a lot of merits, but the thing is, with the older structured data, you could only do so much with the business intelligence, with the analytics part of it, right? You wouldn't be able to do sentiment analysis. You wouldn't be able to, get unstructured tweets from people and find out what they're talking about you and so on, right? And frankly speaking, I think at that point of time, the need was not there. There were some big firms and they were controlling the corporate ecosystem and business was running smooth, so it was not required. But obviously over the last 10 years, a lot has changed. We all have smartphones in our pockets with quad-core processors and 16 GB of memory and 2 GB of RAM, or maybe that is also under spec today. And there are at least 7 to 8 sensors in a smartphone, right? And there are sensors in everything. And each of those sensors are generating data apart from the conventional stuff like stock exchange ticks and hadron collider and airplane flight and so on. And this is just a rendition of the, figuring out what is happening, right? So the video streaming, adding of videos, the number of Google searches, all of these are events. And at that point of time, I think 25 years ago, no one was really paying attention to these events. It did not matter. I mean, acceptance was required. Right now, it matters. Mobile ads matters because out of the 6.5 billion people in the world, 80-85% has a phone. And more likelier than not, with the Android One and all these projects which are bringing the prices down and making it more affordable, everyone has a smartphone. So how do you captivate these potential audience to buying stuff that they don't need to impress people that they don't like, right? That's again how, I mean, a cynical comment, but that's how a lot of people describe it, right? So these are just to give you an idea of what is happening, right? So in 16 seconds, there are about 168 million emails which are sent, and this is extremely potent information to someone like NSA, I mean, who wants to look at those 168 emails and quote unquote track terrorist activity, or basically I don't know what they want to read, right? So that's just a lot of information which are being passed on because of various different web applications, mediums, video conferencing. Each and every bit of data contributes to the overall data growth, right? And these are just sticking slide after slide after slide after slide, just sticking the same thing over and over again, so that I can drive this point home that obviously one is that we have got a lot more data being generated. The sources primarily are a lot of sensors, smartphones, social media. Now, the moment we go to acknowledge that a lot of data is being generated through those mediums, we then come to realize that the data is not being generated in an entirely structured format. So we are dealing with now semi-structured, some form of serialization, and a lot of unstructured data, right? And because there are 4 or 5 billion people who are using cell phones, time zone difference, forget about everything, there are about 1.5 billion people on WhatsApp who are chatting with each other. Each of those chats are generating events. The sheer speed at which data is being added, these events are being generated, requires a lot of firepower to process and read those data. Okay, so what's a petabyte really? A petabyte is 1,000 terabytes of data. So what is a terabyte? It's 1,000 gigabytes of data. This is a remote backup software company. So they back up data on your cloud if you install their client. And this is an infographic which I found. Right. So humanity is, I think, a couple of zettabytes, or maybe I don't remember what the exact current day statistics is. But if you look at this, right, we all have 1 terabyte hard drives, I believe. I mean, I think someone might have more as well. I have got 2 1 terabyte hard drives which are external, and in 2 of my laptops there are 2 terabytes. So I've got 4 terabytes of disk space, and about 60-70% of it full, I would guess. in my home, right? So the volume of data that each individual has or can afford at this point of time is a lot more than it used to be as well, right? And if you look at it, 1 petabyte is about 20 million for four-drawer filing cabinets, and I'm sure you can read this. This is just to give you an idea of what, you know, what really is that size, right? So technically you have already defined it, right? It's a phrase which is used to define or describe a massive volume of both structured and unstructured data, okay? In most enterprise scenario, the data is too big, or it moves too fast, or it exceeds current processing capacity, right? These are the major challenges. When you talk about someone, you have already mentioned clickstream, rolling weblog, network system logs. We didn't really pay attention to most of these things earlier, back in the day when, you know, databases were just about starting to get refined and all. These were not really our point of concern, right? The point of concern was how to lay down the schema, do the ERD, design the data, right? But now all these things are really important, because these people have figured out that this data actually has a lot of information which is potent to improving customer experience. For instance, your network and system logs, there is a poster boy Rackspace use case that people talk about. You can check on it, where Rackspace uses their system logs and network logs to identify when would they want to set up their maintenance downtimes, which would result in the least amount of impact to all their users, right? Very good use. I mean, people talk about first world problems, right? So this is a very useful utility that big data provides. I mean, big data processing allows you to get, right? Big data, therefore, is an umbrella term which is basically holding a lot of different things: structured data, unstructured data, semi-structured data, various types of data, various mediums of data generation. Data is being generated either too fast, or, you know, it is moving too fast. It's not within the current processing capacity, and it is obviously sheer volume in certain scenarios. Also, in certain cases, it might not be, you know, that big in size, but the SLA, or the service level agreement, or what is expected out of the processing of the data, the turnaround time is very low. So, you know, that's really where healthcare fits in. I mean, healthcare does not have a lot of data, okay? It does not really have a lot of data. So I mean, it could be, if I try to include clicks and events and audits and so on, it could be. But the core clinical information I'm talking about, of if you have a finite number of people, so I'm just talking about US, the entire population of US, if you take their health record data, it's a finite amount of information, okay? But the thing is, if I want to track that information and you know, predict whether there is an epidemic, or whether there is something that needs to change in the treatment, the clinical trials and so on, at that point of time, I would not want that report to take you know, what have you, about half an hour, 45 minutes to generate, because I want that data to be updated real time. So in my previous firm, I was working with about 6 to 10 terabytes of data, which is, considering the volume part of the definition, not really a big deal. But the fact that I want real-time analytics happening on it, and my conventional database, data warehouse offering from Microsoft, which is very stable product, I cannot say anything about it, is taking about half an hour to 45 minutes to generate a report, does not help my cause at all, right? So big data, what you classify as big data is a little subjective in different scenarios, okay?